It was a crisp November morning in 2021 when the quiet neighborhood of Gainesville, Georgia, would forever be changed. At the center of the storm stood a massive lake house, built like a monument to success. But this was no ordinary raid. Federal agents stormed in, and what they found would shock the world. Hidden behind a seemingly innocent Cheetos popcorn tin was a secret far darker. Inside that tin was a single-board computer, and on it, $3.4 billion worth of Bitcoin. This was no ordinary heist. This was the story of Jimmy Zhong, a man who had stolen the future, only to make one catastrophic mistake that led to his downfall. Jimmy thought he was untouchable. For years, he had lived in the lap of luxury, flaunting wealth and a lifestyle others could only dream of. But this raid wasn't just about money. It was about justice, and justice was coming for him. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of Jimmy's fall from grace. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think he deserves the punishment he got? Jimmy's rise to power didn't happen overnight. In fact, it began with a childhood filled with pain. He wasn't the cool kid in school. In fact, he was an outsider in every sense of the word. Growing up in Cobb County, Georgia, Jimmy was bullied and ridiculed for being different. He felt invisible, overlooked, and completely out of place. His parents, both first-generation immigrants, struggled just to survive. His mother worked long shifts as a nurse, and his father barely found stable work, often retreating into his own world. But amid the chaos of his family life, there was one escape for Jimmy: his computer. Alone in his room, he found solace in programming, diving deep into coding languages and discovering a world where he could be in control. Little did he know, this digital escape would lead him down a path to unimaginable wealth and destruction. By 2009, Jimmy was in college at the University of Georgia, still trying to impress his parents and fit into a world that seemed so far out of reach. But it was on a lonely evening in front of his computer that he stumbled upon something that would change everything: Bitcoin. It was a new form of digital currency, and at the time, it was practically worthless. But Jimmy, ever the forward thinker, decided to mine it. It wasn't much at first, just a few coins here and there, but it was a start. Fast forward to 2011, and Bitcoin had skyrocketed in value. Jimmy, now realizing the potential of what he had mined years ago, went searching for his lost fortune. But there was one problem: he couldn't find it. The coins he had mined had vanished, hidden somewhere on his laptop. This sent Jimmy on a desperate hunt, hoping to recover what he had lost. By 2011, Bitcoin was worth around $30 per coin, and Jimmy's frustration grew. Where had he saved those coins? It was a bitter blow. He had mined thousands of them, but they were now worth a small fortune, and they were gone. This loss would only fuel his obsession with Bitcoin. Desperate, Jimmy dove back into mining, hoping to earn back what he had lost, and more. Over the next few years, Jimmy became obsessed. His knowledge of computers and programming led him to perfect his mining operation, and soon he was making significant gains. He had found a new purpose, and it was all tied to Bitcoin. But as his wealth grew, so did his recklessness. By 2012, Jimmy had plunged into the dark side of the internet, discovering the Silk Road, a notorious marketplace where users could buy and sell illegal goods, all using Bitcoin. It was a place where Jimmy, ever the opportunist, began to indulge in the dark underbelly of the digital world. But then something strange happened. Jimmy made a mistake, one that would change everything. While withdrawing coins from Silk Road, Jimmy accidentally double-clicked the transaction button. The result? He received double the amount of Bitcoin he had intended to withdraw. It was a flaw in the system, a glitch in the code that Jimmy was quick to exploit. Over the course of several months, he continued to use this flaw to rake in thousands of Bitcoin. But in 2013, Jimmy made his biggest mistake yet. He couldn't resist showing off. He created a new account on Bitcoin Talk, a popular forum for cryptocurrency enthusiasts, and began bragging about his newfound wealth. He wasn't just mining Bitcoin anymore. He was now a Bitcoin millionaire, a self-proclaimed expert in digital currency. He posted about his success, flaunting his 40,000 coins and claiming to manage a massive portfolio. He even went as far as to say he was responsible for the recent market crashes, all in an attempt to show off. But this wasn't just arrogance. This was the beginning of his downfall. The FBI had been tracking the Silk Road for years, and when they seized control of the site in 2013, they found a treasure trove of information. Among the data were records of every transaction that had ever taken place, including Jimmy's. They began to connect the dots, slowly uncovering his involvement in the illegal marketplace. But Jimmy wasn't worried. He thought he had covered his tracks. He had used mixers to hide his transactions, keeping his identity well protected. But in the world of digital currency, nothing stays hidden forever. As 2015 rolled around, Bitcoin's popularity soared. The currency was now worth thousands of dollars per coin, and Jimmy's stash was worth tens of millions. But he wasn't done yet. He continued to use his wealth to indulge in a lifestyle of excess. Parties, drugs, expensive cars. It was all part of his attempt to fill the void inside. Despite his wealth, Jimmy's life was spiraling out of control. He had grown addicted to the high of both his money and the drugs. And yet, there was something more. Jimmy was now being watched. The FBI had him in their sights, and they were inching closer with every passing day. In 2019, Jimmy made yet another costly mistake. He reported a break-in at his home, claiming that a briefcase containing over $400,000 in cash and a thumb drive with personal information had been stolen. The police investigation raised flags, and the IRS began to take notice. How could someone so wealthy be so careless? It didn't add up, and the IRS began their own investigation. Little did Jimmy know, the walls were closing in. His wealth, which had once seemed like a gift from the digital gods, was now the very thing that would bring him down. By 2021, the IRS had enough evidence to make their move. Agents raided Jimmy's lake house, uncovering millions in assets, but the real prize was hidden in that popcorn tin. Inside was the computer that held his $3.4 billion in Bitcoin. It was the end of the line for Jimmy. His empire had crumbled, and all that was left were the pieces of his once glorious fortune. As Jimmy sat in a holding cell, he began to break. The reality of his actions sank in. He had spent years building a life of excess, but it had all been built on lies. The Bitcoin that had once been his escape from the pain of his past had now become the chains that bound him. In a moment of weakness, he gave up the key to his fortune. The court proceedings were swift. Jimmy pleaded guilty to money laundering, and the judge sentenced him to 1 year and 1 day in prison. His wealth, once worth billions, was now in the hands of the government. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the price of his greed, the lives he had ruined, and the justice that had finally caught up with him. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It was a sight that would forever be etched in Jimmy Zhong's memory. The high life he had built, from nothing but programming skills and a thirst for digital currency, had crumbled in an instant. The authorities had seized everything. His luxury cars, his mansions, his private jets, and of course, his multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin stash. But the most brutal blow came in the form of a government official standing before him. As the agents filed out with evidence in tow, one thing became painfully clear. The empire Jimmy had worked so hard to build was no more. His life was no longer his own. The money, the power, the parties, it was all gone. All that remained was his own shame. Jimmy had been careful, or so he thought. His Bitcoin transactions were hidden behind layers of encryption, mixed through tumbling services to mask their origin. He had been intelligent enough to stay under the radar for years. But what he didn't know was that his every move had been quietly tracked by authorities. The government had been waiting for him to make a mistake, and when he finally did, with a poorly handled Bitcoin transaction in 2019, everything began to unravel. The authorities had traced the coins back to the Silk Road, linking them to Jimmy's account. They now had a clear trail from his earliest days of theft to the present. Jimmy had played a dangerous game, and in the end, it was his own arrogance that sealed his fate. Looking back, it was clear where everything had gone wrong. Jimmy's involvement with the Silk Road marketplace had set him on a path from which there would be no return. But to Jimmy, it was just another gamble, a chance to make a fortune in the shadows of the internet. He had no idea the magnitude of what he was getting into. Silk Road was more than just a marketplace. It was a breeding ground for crime. drugs, weapons, stolen data, all exchanged for Bitcoin. When Jimmy accidentally exploited a flaw in the Silk Road system, he saw an opportunity to make millions. But he didn't realize that with every transaction, every withdrawal, every step he took, he was only tightening the noose around his own neck. The friends Jimmy had made along the way weren't the kind of people you wanted on your side. They were just as reckless, just as self-serving. One of them, Clayton Kemker, was involved in a real estate venture that Jimmy funded with millions of dollars of Bitcoin. But this wasn't just about business. Jimmy was trying to impress everyone, his friends, women, even strangers on the internet. By 2019, Jimmy had become a show-off. He flaunted his wealth on Bitcoin forums, made brash posts about managing millions in assets, and even boasted about his success on social media. But every time he bragged about his millions, he dug himself deeper into a hole. His public declarations were now like a beacon to law enforcement, who had been tracking Bitcoin transactions for years. In March 2019, everything took a turn for the worse. Jimmy reported a break-in at his home, claiming that his briefcase, containing $400,000 in cash and a thumb drive loaded with Bitcoin, was stolen. It was a suspicious crime that made the IRS raise an eyebrow. How could someone so wealthy be so careless? This break-in was the catalyst for the investigation into Jimmy's finances. Law enforcement began to dig deeper into his transactions, tracing his purchases and tracking the origins of his wealth. They quickly discovered that the cash in the briefcase wasn't just money. It was a symbol of everything Jimmy had lost and the lengths he would go to hide his tracks. By the time 2021 rolled around, the IRS had uncovered a staggering amount of information. They had pieced together Jimmy's involvement with Silk Road, his Bitcoin heists, and the way he had been laundering money for years. What began as a small investigation into an alleged stolen briefcase turned into one of the largest digital crime cases in history. The agents worked tirelessly, poring over records, tracing wallets, and compiling evidence that would lead them directly to Jimmy. They had been monitoring the Bitcoin blockchain for years, and Jimmy's mistakes, particularly his sloppy handling of transactions in 2019, had exposed him. It was Jimmy's own digital footprint that ultimately led to his capture. Every Bitcoin transaction was publicly recorded on the blockchain, an immutable ledger. And while Bitcoin was originally touted as a completely anonymous currency, Jimmy's inability to cover his tracks properly led to a glaring mistake. The authorities tracked his every move on the blockchain. From the moment he took Bitcoin from Silk Road to the time he bragged about it online, every transaction was visible to those who knew where to look. Jimmy's attempt to mix his coins only delayed the inevitable, but it couldn't prevent the inevitable. In 2021, the IRS had amassed enough evidence to make their move. They raided Jimmy's lake house, and what they found was staggering. Inside a bathroom closet, hidden behind blankets, was the computer containing the $3.4 billion worth of Bitcoin. Jimmy's empire was now in the hands of the government, and the digital currency that once made him a millionaire was now his prison. As they confiscated the computer and all his assets, Jimmy was left to face the music. His life, built on a foundation of digital crime and arrogance, was now reduced to rubble. But the real tragedy was yet to come. In the months following his arrest, Jimmy faced long hours of questioning, his guilt hanging heavy in the air. He had built his life on lies, hiding his true identity behind the veil of Bitcoin transactions. But now, with nowhere left to hide, he had to confront the reality of his actions. Jimmy eventually broke. He handed over the private key to his Bitcoin fortune, allowing the authorities access to his $3.4 billion. But it was too late to undo the damage he had caused. Jimmy's trial was swift, but the consequences were severe. He pled guilty to money laundering, admitting his role in the Silk Road heist and the illegal acquisition of millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The judge was firm in his sentencing, stating that while the victim in this case was a criminal enterprise, Jimmy's actions had wider implications. The victim could have been a legitimate business. In the end, Jimmy was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. The public was divided. Some saw Jimmy as a victim of circumstance, a man who had been swept up in a world of digital excess. Others saw him as a criminal who deserved everything he got. But regardless of the opinion, one thing was certain: justice had been served. In the aftermath, Jimmy's wealth was confiscated and the government took control of his assets. His Bitcoin fortune was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of greed and the fragility of fortune. Jimmy Zhong, once a self-proclaimed Bitcoin millionaire, was left to reflect on his life in prison. He had everything: wealth, power, status, but in the end, it wasn't enough. His lust for more had led him down a dark path, one that ended with him alone, broke, and defeated. As he sat in his cell, Jimmy wondered if it was all worth it. The drugs, the money, the women, the cars, it had all led to this. A single mistake, one fatal flaw in his carefully constructed empire, had brought it all crashing down. And now, justice had taken its course. What do you think of Jimmy's fate? Was his sentence too light? Or did he get what he deserved? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything. Don't miss out on future deep dives into the world of digital crime and justice. Stay tuned for more.